for Robert Hansen promised a weekend in his wood cabin. Robert Hansen is one of the most chilling serial killers of all time. He abducted and murdered at least 17 women in Anchorage, Alaska, during a 12-year killing spree in the 1970s and 80s. He targeted sex workers and strippers, inviting them on a trip aboard his bush plane and promising a weekend stay at his remote wood cabin in Matanuska-Susitna Valley, about 35 miles north of Anchorage. After days of torture, the victims were let free to run for their lives in the wilderness, but Hansen's sinister game was not over yet. In the wilderness, the exhausted victims were hunted down by Hansen with his .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 rifle and a knife. As the bodies started to pile up in the area, police began to build a case against the seemingly quiet and unassuming local businessman. When police arrested Hansen, they found shell casings from his rifle scattered around Nick River and at his home. They also discovered a map with tiny X symbols where he had buried the bodies. John Hay lured the parents of his murder victim to the basement. John George Hay became known as the acid bath murderer after it was discovered he was dissolving the bodies of his victims using a sulfuric acid bath in the basement of his London home. Hay first experimented with field mice and he found it took only 30 minutes for the entire body to dissolve. The next step in his plan was to move on to human beings. In 1944, he was reunited with his former employer William MCSWA, who collected rents on London properties, and he became very jealous of his lavish lifestyle. He then lured MCSWA into his basement, where he hit him over the head and put the body into a 40-gallon drum of concentrated sulfuric acid. Hay revealed it took 2 days for the body to melt, and then he poured the remains down a manhole. MCSWA's parents became suspicious after not hearing word from their son until Hay said he was planning on surprising them with a visit. He lured them to the same basement their son had met his fate, and with a blow to each of their heads, he disposed of their bodies in the acid bath. Following his arrest, it was found Hay forged the family signatures so he could sell their possessions and collect a fortune on their behalf to drive. H. Holmes impressed people with his grand fortune. Dr. H. Holmes is widely considered America's first serial killer, as the confidence trickster built a large hotel for guests attending the Chicago World Fair in 1892. In reality, the building, which became known as Holmes' Murder Castle, was an elaborate gas chamber and crematorium. The skeletal remains of his victims were sold to medical schools for a good price. Holmes tricked his victims by posing as a successful businessman and with a grand hotel to his name, who would not believe him. Yet, Holmes had murdered his way to the top, forging insurance documents and swindling creditors out of money every step of the way. In reality, he was practically penniless. The serial killer's real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, and he even lied about his own victim count, claiming he murdered hundreds of victims. Yet only the deaths of 9 victims were confirmed, and many of the people he claimed to have killed were eventually found still alive. He was hanged at Mohamensing Prison in 1896. When Catherine and David Burney knew victims would trust a woman, Catherine and David Burney were a depraved duo from Perth, Australia. The couple stalked females who were alone and could be tricked into accepting a ride because there was Catherine reassuring them it was safe to get into the car. Over 4 weeks, they tortured and murdered 4 victims aged between 15 to 31 years old, with Catherine either taking photos or making videos of their heinous crimes. Their final intended victim was 17-year-old Kate Moyer, who said she accepted a ride from the harmless-looking couple. She soon realized the door handle in the car